Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Cargill People in Science Live, now streaming across LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. I'm Francesca Braccarotto, your host, and I'm really excited about today's session because we're talking about something many of us are feeling, especially at the start of a new year. January is often when motivation is at its peak, and we want to change habits, improve focus, feel more energized, and yet, for many people, me included, those changes don't often stick and that can quickly turn into frustration or self-blame. Today's conversation is about stepping away from that sort of narrative. This is a discussion about discipline, willpower, or trying harder, or at least not just about that. It's about understanding how our environment shapes energy, focus, and fulfillment, and why feeling depleted doesn't necessarily mean you're doing something wrong. To explore this, I'm delighted to be joined by TJ Power, author of the Dose Effect book that I have here, and founder of the Dose Lab. Among many other things, TJ work looks at how modern environments quietly drain dopamine, even for high-performing, motivated people like you, and how small, sustainable design choices can help us work with our brains rather than against them. This won't be just a digital detox conversation, and it certainly won't be preachy. We'll keep it practical, grounded, and realistic, and we'll even build a dopamine-smart day live. TJ, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here in this conversation.
Fantastic. So before we get into the practical side of things that I'm sure everybody's waiting for, I'd love to start at the very beginning. So what first sparked your interest in studying dopamine? And since it's such a buzzword online and it's often misunderstood, could you also explain what dopamine is and what is the biggest myth people believe about dopamine today?
Yeah, I would say what sparked my interest is a discovery of my own challenges with what I would describe now as dopamine addiction from a young age as a teenager, whether it was social media. I had an iPhone from when I was sort of 11 years old, for example. So very young, I was deep into tech or video games or then alcohol and sugar. I had a brain that loved stimulation effectively. And my life became quite kind of revolved around stimulation. Even when I was working, I would sit there and I'd try and concentrate, but I'd constantly want to check my phone, check my WhatsApp, check LinkedIn, check for new emails. I had this like inability to really calm my brain and get it focused. Dopamine, when I discovered it, was this like portal to understanding. I was like, okay, so it's dopamine that I'm seeking. And if I can understand how to get it in a healthy way, maybe I could calm this sort of addictive brain that I have. And in terms of the biggest myth about dopamine, it's definitely the idea that you get dopamine when you get some kind of reward in life. Because for a number of years, for a few decades, dopamine's been called and termed the reward chemical. But modern
Okay.
neuroscience explains that dopamine is much more a chemical of seeking and anticipation and desire for things rather than actually getting them. And that's why, for example, sometimes you can think in your head for ages and ages, when you get a certain job promotion, then I'll feel really, really happy. And then you get the job promotion. It does feel good, but you almost crash a little bit when you get the thing you really desired, but you actually felt your best just before you got the thing because you knew you were nearly there. And dopamine is
Mhm.
this seeking chemical. And that's why, for example, technology has become super addictive because it's this constant seeking and anticipation for what is out there, what's on LinkedIn, what new emails have I got, what notifications have I got, and understanding this nature in the brain can make a big difference to then how we get calm and focused.
Okay, that's very interesting. It sounds very much familiar. That kind of buzz of I need to look at my LinkedIn, I need to look at my social media account, might be a like or something. So let's start with that. So how does dopamine affect, actually influence everyday energy and focus, but like not in theory, but just in real life for those listening in today?
Yeah, it's really useful to understand kind of the evolutionary mechanism behind dopamine when you think about this. Our whole research lab has built DOSE, this model that is an acronym for our four different brain chemicals, on evolutionary mismatch, the idea that our brain evolved for 300,000 years as hunter-gatherers in the wild. Now, over the last 30 years, we've moved to this kind of indoor sedentary screen human, and it's very confusing for our brain's evolutionary history. And when you look at dopamine specifically, dopamine evolved in our brain as hunter gatherers to make the experience of putting in effort to anything feel good. So whenever we were making fires and building shelters and hunting, dopamine was generating this positive feeling and this very motivating feeling that would drive us to do things. In our day-to-day life now, when you refer to it in terms of how does it impact your daily energy, the amount of dopamine in your brain, the amount of natural dopamine in your brain will dictate how much desire and motivation you have to do anything, to work, to clean your house, to do sport, to cook healthy food. Many of us nowadays are very low on dopamine, and we can explain why that is as we continue chatting. And it's killing our motivation. So we kind of sit around and we constantly click on LinkedIn and go on our email and we scroll our phones because we're low on this key molecule.
Okay, so it becomes kind of a vicious circle. You're trying to get more, and then it just keep crashing. Yeah, yeah. So how do this kind of modern environment, as you said, is very much different from our ancestors? How does it drain dopamine without us even noticing? Is there like what's happening?
It's super fascinating, this, and this context has given me a lot of kind of clarity as to what's going on in my own brain. And I'll explain this. This is quite neuroscience-y, but I'll make this super simple so we can visualize it. But you have this area in your brain, deep within the center of your brain, called your VTA. It's called your ventral tegmental area. And we can rename that to kind of dopamine factory. And in there, your brain is generating what we'd think of as dopamine bubbles. And they are literally these tiny little vesicles that are being created in your dopamine factory. Next to your VTA, your dopamine factory, you have something called your nucleus accumbens, which is your reward center in your brain. If I give you a really simple example of cleaning our house, everyone has to clean their house from time to time. It's not necessarily something you want to do, but often you'll notice that as you do it, you actually do feel better and better the cleaner your house gets. You start thinking, oh, I'm kind of satisfied that I've made the kitchen all nice before I relax, or whatever it might be. In that situation in your brain, because you're putting in effort, starts to generate these bubbles in the dopamine factory. And then whilst it's generating the bubbles to give you motivation, it starts occasionally shipping a few of the bubbles to your nucleus accumbens, your reward center. And it gives you this nice positive feeling. And you get this feedback. You think, oh, this is kind of good that I'm doing this activity. In the modern world, we basically changed how this factory works. Because say, for example, when we scroll short videos, which has become kind of the main way in which we spend our free time now. When you scroll short videos, your brain basically mass sends the bubbles from the factory to the reward center. So it feels really good. You're like, wow, this is really stimulating. And suddenly I can't think about any of my problems and life just feels really relaxing in this moment. But because there's no effort involved, your factory starts to basically run out because it's only effort that regenerates the bubbles in the factory. So suddenly you've got all this dopamine in your reward center. All this kind of stimulation, LinkedIn, emails, short videos all day, is using up all that dopamine in the factory. And that's why the modern world is creating low dopamine levels.
Oh, I see. That's very interesting, and to know how that works. And thank you for simplifying that for us. So I'm just wondering, because we are all here connected, especially people like, watching from LinkedIn and YouTube. What is the main difference, or do you think if there is a difference between the consumption of short video, as you said, when you're scrolling through things, or maybe logging in for a course online and things like that? Is there a difference in between that? Because I would think following a course will require more attention, more work than simply scrolling too. So is there anything in between?
Yeah, there's a huge difference, and it's as extreme of a difference as one is literally good for you and very positive, and one is not necessarily good for you and could potentially cause problems. And the reason being is what actually creates this kind of initial stimulation in dopamine is novelty, anything that's new. So for our ancestors, if I was in my tribe and I suddenly saw a deer walk past the tribe, that novelty of seeing the deer, the potential food, would create this increase in dopamine, and then I'd have this seeking motivation feeling rise within me to go and get the food. Wow. And we would get this kind of feeling of novelty maybe 2 or 3 times a day, maybe a fresh water source, fire, and so on. And when you watch short videos, it's just novelty. It's new video. And it's not actually the videos themselves that are kind of burning our dopamine out. It's the anticipation in your mind of what the next video might be, and the curiosity that means your dopamine keeps thinking, is there another deer? Is there another deer? And it burns it out. When someone, say, is listening to this conversation, so they might be sitting back in their chair, they're looking at LinkedIn or whatever it might be, there's not huge novelty because the whole context isn't changing. You're not suddenly watching another video, another video, another video. You're staying on one thing. And the extreme example of this is if you read a book, the context doesn't change at all. And you'll notice after reading a book, you always feel really satisfied after reading a book and dissatisfied after doom scrolling because of the difference in dopamine activation. And whenever we're using tech, and I love tech, I love watching videos. If ever we choose the long form on YouTube, or as you say, taking courses, watching these sort of interviews and podcasts, that is slowly generating dopamine in our brain so it doesn't get exhausted and it doesn't burn out.
Ah, lovely. Thank you. And so that's great news for everybody's watching. Well, sometimes I'm watching, I was like, am I scrolling? Am I watching? What am I doing? So thanks for clarifying this. And
can I add one thing on there as well?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Something that's quite interesting is relaxing in the evening has become quite hard without your phone, because it's like we've got into this familiar pattern where you kind of put the TV on and you get your phone out and you start your doom scroll. And then if you put the phone down, the TV feels a bit too boring. So then you kind of pick the phone back up and we get into this loop. And there is this point where your brain does settle. And my partner and I have intentionally started watching older movies kind of from like the 1990s and early 2000s. Last night we watched, for example, one called Good Will Hunting that I'd never seen before. It's like an old Ben Affleck and Matt Damon movie. And when you watch it, it is a lot slower because everything was slower back then because our dopamine systems were more regulated 20, 30 years ago. And it's such a good thing to try. Like as a little experiment this evening is try putting your phone in another room, put on one of those sort of 1990s, 2000s movies and just watch how your brain will, after sort of 50 minutes, slow down. And it makes you feel much better than an evening spent kind of double screening.
Excellent. Thank you for the tip. And actually, I won't comment on the old movie because to me that is not old at all.
Just not brand new.
I think there was actually a very interesting point that Matt Damon just made, that they have to oversimplify scripts now for a series of movies because people are constantly on their phone. So they have to.
Oh, did he say that?
Yeah, they have to reiterate the same message or the kind of where the story is going and make it very kind of clear and super simple because people are distracted. They're on the phones all the time while they're watching movies. And he does appreciate that. I agree with him. You should really be focusing on one thing, but that's a good thing to try at home as well. To just put phones aside and focus on that. So thank you for that. And so this affects multitasking in general, or are we talking just when we're doing things connected to digital things like watching TV and phone? Can you multitask and still get the right amount of dopamine, or?
Yeah, it depends on the multitasking.
Okay.
Typically, digital stimulation is the thing that's sort of stimulating us too rapidly in the brain because it's so brand new. If you were to dance and sing whilst cleaning your house, that would not do anything bad for your dopamine. If anything, that would actually be really good for your brain chemistry. If you were playing tennis or paddle and talking to people at the same time, that kind of all of those sort of things, that would be good. So it's more multitasking in the digital world that's creating difficulty. If you were cooking and chatting, all these kind of things, they're good. They're natural for the brain.
Fantastic. That's really good to know. So now let's talk about detox. And, we, at the beginning of the year, we always feel motivated to just like drop everything, do like some kind of digital detox off Instagram, off social media for a month and see how it goes. So people feel motivated to try and reset, and then it kind of fades, obviously, just 1 month in. So what makes digital detoxes or short-term resets like this ineffective in the long run?
Yeah, I think that there's a few different challenges with these big detoxes, which is sometimes when you come back into the digital world, it's so stimulating that it's kind of a new level of addiction is born within you because you're like, whoa, all these WhatsApp, all these emails, all this Instagram. And it can actually be pretty overwhelming, to be honest. I remember the first time I did one of these kind of cabins where you turn your phone off for 4 days, and I kind of came back on to my phone and it kind of undid all the benefits because I was like, that is so much information to try and process and respond to. And I think one of the important kind of mindset shifts is around how can we consistently be taking small amounts of time off technology rather than kind of creating a lifestyle where you feel like you have to suddenly have these big detoxes. Like if we were running, when we're running our research studies in our lab, we'll get people doing a short morning detox when they wake for kind of 15 minutes before they'll first see their device. So they kind of get into that rhythm, because that can be a really hard shift in itself. And then maybe eating some of the meals that they eat without their phone in their hand whilst they eat their lunch, for example. Or one shift that can seem ridiculous but is actually very significant is just spending a week not taking their phone to the bathroom, because lots of us have got into this pattern where your phone comes to the bathroom with you, then you end up on your phone. And our brain just throughout the day needs little windows where we kind of come out of the technology, back into it, out of it, back into it, so it can constantly regulate. But what I found when I got deep into tech addiction was I actually hated any time not looking at a screen. I'd kind of look at a screen all day, and then I'd think, okay, I'm done with this screen. I'm going to head for the big screen and just stare at that screen with a small screen in my hand at the same time. I basically became uncomfortable with my dopamine ever kind of settling. Once you begin to be okay with that feeling, these little short breaks, your dopamine system regulates, and then it works much better. So when you do need it and you need motivation, it's there for you.
Right. Perfect. So I was going to ask for, people watching this, what is the most common dopamine depleting habits that people fall into, especially busy professionals that are always, you need to connect and work on screens with screens and things like that. So, and then we can move into how to actually apply in real life, obviously some tips for that. But what do you think is the most kind of the worst habit, really?
Yeah, I would say the most significant disruptor is the short form video feeds, the YouTube shorts, Instagram reels, Facebook reels, TikTok, because nothing has ever activated dopamine like those before. If you actually kind of think back to the internet before short videos existed, and that's basically before COVID. TikTok was invented in COVID, and then all the platforms gradually copied. If you go back before COVID, we were obviously like a bit hooked on technology, but we couldn't just sort of doom scroll Instagram for hours every single day. But that feed has made it possible. And I can't recommend enough just trying maybe a week where you actually just let go of short video feeds completely. That doesn't mean let go of content. You can still watch YouTube on your TV, watch movies, watch Netflix. You could go on Instagram and stay on the normal feed for a little bit and watch some. But I would just try and like not let yourself into the kind of YouTube shorts, Instagram reels world for a little bit, because you'll be shocked at what it does to the dopamine. So that's been the main one. The other kind of key thing to consider is just never really having prolonged periods of time where you work on your computer without context switching your brain. And it's actually takes so much focus now to do this. So when I'm writing my book, for example, for me to actually get into a deep state of flow and focus, we know the brain takes an absolute minimum of about 15 minutes of staying on one thing before it really begins to dial its attention in. So often now we kind of do the tiniest bit of a task and we get this feeling of, oh, that tiny bit is done. So then I'm going to go on email and LinkedIn and my phone just to reward myself for that tiny bit of completion. And if there could just be, even if it was one window per day where you're like, I'm going to try one window once, maybe in the morning or once in the afternoon, where you actually have Slack and WhatsApp and everything shut, and you can tell your team if you need to, I'm just going to try and focus for a second, and just have a prolonged deep concentration period, because the kind of frequency of task switch is the kind of second thing to short video that's very, very tricky for the dopamine.
Right. So do you think that was kind of the worst thing before the kind of the rise of short video? So pre-COVID, that seems to be the first problem that we could have in terms
Definitely.
of
It's this. The screens themselves are like these unlimited novelty machines that we never had this as humans. You think when you're out in the jungle, there was just not as much novelty. Everything was pretty similar and it was very rare there was novelty. And now we have these screens that literally just do everything. And it's very tricky for the brain to manage, and something that I think many people could benefit from really getting conscious of, because our attention spans are really deteriorating, and I've felt it myself, and it can be hard to actually kind of sit down and try and write an email for 20 minutes, like a really good email or whatever the project might be, without changing. It's hard, but it's a muscle in the brain. We even have this thing called your AMCC, which is a part of your brain that controls your willpower. It's this little small center in the brain, and the more you kind of utilize willpower and force yourself to not give in to temptation, the stronger this AMCC gets. And vice
Right.
versa, the more you give in to temptation, the weaker it gets. And we're seeing in research that AMCCs are literally getting smaller over time. Like our willpower is reducing because we're just
Mm.
giving in to temptation too much as a species. And if this afternoon you can think, okay, I've got this one task and I just really would love it this evening if it was done, and you could just say, okay, no WhatsApp, no email, no LinkedIn for a little bit. It's just, you'll be so shocked at how much better the brain feels if it has these windows of deep focus.
Right. So that really leads nicely into my next question, because I'm a really big fan of discipline when it comes to having to do stuff. And I am aware that, willpower sometimes will get you just that far. And now that I know there is a
Yeah.
muscle that needs to be trained, I will look into that a bit more. But yeah, because, willpower, or at least the will to do something, can come and go. Discipline allows you to follow that path and try and get things done. But we're talking also about having an environment that is more effective and allows us to do things more easily, along with having willpower and discipline. So how can professionals improve dopamine effective balance without disconnecting from modern life? What can they do in their environment to make it more effective?
Yeah, so we could think of this as kind of your physical and your digital environment. Both can kind of have an impact. If you start with your physical environment, one of the most interesting things just to understand in general about the environment around you is there are a few things that are actually as good for your dopamine as cleaning your environment itself. So if, for example, you wanted a load of motivation on a Monday, spending some time on a Sunday really cleaning your office or your bedroom, kitchen, whatever it might be, the act of actually cleaning an environment is going to be good for your dopamine. And there's some great research I wrote about in my first book, which was this idea that your environment around you is almost like an externalization of your mind. And as you clean it, you actually notice your mind begins to become more and more clear. And often, to actually really well execute a specific task, we need a very clear mind. So having an environment like that is important. In terms of where your tech is in your environment is also crucial. It is pretty much impossible to get into deep flow states if your phone is by your keyboard, because it's just going to be too tempting. As you say, willpower will disappear for a moment. And if we were to get into a habit where we always had a glass of red wine by our keyboards all day, there'd also be probably some more tricky things happening with our relationship with red wine. And phones and red wine, in terms of dopamine, it's very similar. So getting into a habit where it's sort of, okay, phones don't go on my desk, they go kind of on the kitchen table or something, so that you're just away from it for periods of time, I think is super powerful. And then inside your computer itself, it's very important to have a reduction in the amount of things you could click on and distract yourself with. When you kind of swipe up on your trackpad and everything will appear on your computer and you'll see all your AI and your email and LinkedIn and everything.
Yep.
Every time your brain sees the potential for distraction, it'll get this anticipatory dopamine spike and move it in that direction. Whereas if it doesn't see it, it actually makes a big difference. So I try something as simple as when I want to write my book, I'll open Google Docs, for example, and make sure that I'll full screen it, just so that my brain can't even see the apps at the bottom. Because I know, based on neuroscience, that even the sight of the Google Chrome icon, for example, will make my brain think about YouTube and LinkedIn. Whereas if I can't see it, so you want to kind of create a digital landscape on your computer where as much stuff is shut as possible and just the task in front of you is what's open.
Right. So out of sight, out of mind, literally.
Literally out of sight, out of mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
And please,
because it's the same with
Sorry?
sugar, and same with sugar. Like if there's loads of chocolate and sugar in your cupboard, it's going to be super hard not to eat it when the willpower dips. If it's not there, likely going to eat a lot less. And the same happens with the technology in front of us.
Of course. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing these tips with us. And so let's move into the live application of these tips, and just try and create a dopamine smart day for people watching. And please do not keep a glass of red wine next to your computer all day.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Yeah. I'll try. So can we try? And if for someone that wants to start small, what's the one change they can make tomorrow with the biggest impact? Some tips that they can apply already, starting tomorrow.
Yeah. So the first tip, and in our research lab, the most significant based on kind of dopamine-based screen addiction is which plug socket your charger is plugged into at nighttime and whether that plug socket is right by your head. And most of us have a habit of having our phone
Hmm.
charged right by our heads. And when our brain wakes up in the morning, it has this evolutionary drive within it to look for dopamine. It wants it because that's how our ancestors woke up, with this drive to hunt or make the fire or help the kids, whatever it might be, despite how unbelievably hard life would have been in the wild. And wherever it finds that first source of dopamine from, it begins to locate and identify that as its primary source of stimulation. So if, for example, tomorrow morning you woke up and you didn't have the phone charging by your head and you got dopamine from having a shower or making your bed or 5 minutes of walking or meditating or cooking your breakfast, anything, even if it's very, very small, your brain is then primed towards the more effortful path. And when we wake up in the morning, we think it's so insignificant, just a quick check of WhatsApp, quick check of my email. We think it's so minor, but it's actually training addiction into the brain and training us to crave easy rewards over the more effortful ones. And the effortful ones are the ones that create the life that we're all really looking for. So I'd say the first step is to charge the phone either at the end of your bed if you need it for your alarm. You could use an iPad as your alarm. You could use an iPad if you need to kind of listen to something to get you to sleep. There's lots of different reasons why we all think we can't have our phone by our heads.
Yeah,
But often
yeah.
we discover in our lab that it's fine. And most of us did sort of 20 or 30 years before we even got an iPhone, and we were fine then as well, before the iPhone charged by our head. But there are a few things in our lab as a step one for dopamine that we see as more significant than the decision you make when you wake.
Okay, perfect. And throughout the day, so we you mentioned about trying to restrict the number of kind of things that could distract you. So maybe keep the phone away from your laptop while you're working, and minimize all the kind of icons for different programs when you're trying to work on something. I guess something like the tomato or whatever it's called method could also work. Focusing on something for 30 minutes and maybe get a reward after. Does that work?
Yeah, you can. I think those techniques, they have pros and cons, just because sometimes the really amazing moment of focus might actually be happening around 25 to 30 minutes. And then it's a shame if you actually lose all that like power you just built within your brain. I know how hard it is to get to 25 minutes, but sometimes we get to like the point where our brain is going to be in optimum functioning, just like a athlete playing in Wimbledon, and they like 30 minutes into a match and suddenly their performance is very high because they've been concentrating for a while. So sometimes I wouldn't want someone to kind of give up at that moment where their brain's about to function at a super high level. But in general, timing how long you can focus for, I think, is really good. Say, for example, getting your phone, you already don't want it by your desk, you could take it into another room, and rather than doing a timer, you could put a stopwatch on counting up from 0. And then after you focus for the max amount you can manage, you could go back and look at the stopwatch, and whatever that number is kind of your new personal best for concentration. And you might get 20 minutes, you might get 36 minutes, you might get 50 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it might be. And that's for me how I retrained my attention span as a young person that grew up very ADHD, 0 attention span at all. I kind of gamified it with how long could I get that number to be. So that could be a cool one. And in terms of just the other things to think about, there's just 2 other factors that are kind of outside of the digital landscape that are impacting the dopamine significantly. And those are sunlight and protein. Both sunlight and protein are very significant for generating and restoring our dopamine levels, our motivation in our brain. The sunlight, particularly in the morning, is very significant. And especially here in the UK at the moment, you kind of wake up and think, oh, I don't want to go outside. It's horrible out there. So we wake up, we go on our phone, we wait, and then we go on our computer, and then we're just in there. Even if you could get sort of 10 to 15 minutes, even when it's cloudy and raining, your brain's actually manufacturing a ton of dopamine out there from the light. So that could be really good. It doesn't have to be long that you're out there. Even if, for example, you normally take your kids to school, if ever you could walk them for 10 minutes to school, for example, these are minor changes that impact the system. And then with the sunlight, protein breaks down in your body to something called tyrosine, an amino acid that actually helps us make dopamine. So high protein in the morning, for many reasons, is beneficial. But from a dopamine perspective, things like Greek yogurt and eggs, anything that is high protein for you, but particularly Greek yogurt and eggs, very beneficial to then helping you have a nice stable dopamine level.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for sharing these tips. Definitely we'll look into that as well. So diet, lies, they all contribute to this.
Yeah.
I'm afraid our time for this interview today is over. So there is so much to talk about. This is ridiculous. We might have to do this again. One last thing, one last thing you'd like to say about dopamine that you would like people to take away from this conversation today.
I would really love people to start gaining more restorative rest from their evenings so that their daytime experiences can go better. Because if you jump back 20 or 30 years when people worked in offices, I'm sure working in offices was very hard and that you had to work in a very focused manner. But if you left the office and went home, you then hung out with your kids, or you watched movies, or read, or cooked, or did anything, listens to music, but you switched off. And our brain is not getting that experience anymore. And in that experience of switching off, your dopamine then regenerates. So the next day you're like, bang, I'm ready to nail life and be productive. But if the whole evening is spent burning out the dopamine, we wake up and we feel sluggish and everything feels really like annoying and horrible and irritable. So if in the evenings you could start thinking of them as actual kind of windows where you're not going to check your email, and I'm not talking the whole email, but the evening, your email or your Teams or whatever it might be, just for a period of time. So maybe you chat to your partner or your friends or family this evening and you say, okay, for this week, from 7:30 till 8:30 p.m., I'm going to try and have this 1 hour window where I don't check any kind of new message information and don't doom scroll my phone. And I can watch movies, I can cook, I can eat food, I can listen to music. But I think having a window every evening to allow your dopamine to restore will make a big difference to your days ahead.
Fantastic. And I bet you sleep better as well.
Yeah, you sleep way better. And this is realistic stuff. I'm not meaning come home from work, don't look at screens and meditate for 5 hours. This is just, that could be good though, if you're willing to do it. But just come home from work and have little longer windows where you can just kind of step out of this novelty-based stimulation.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm sure I will try it. So I hope people from watching this will try that as well. And, give us your feedback. I'm sure that Jay would like to know. So, comment under the post and let us know.
I'll definitely go check out on LinkedIn as well. I'll chat to people on there.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. So please feel free to write under the video whenever you have time. So, TJ, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing such clear, grounded, and really practical insights. And I hope everyone watching leaves the session feeling a bit lighter with the understanding that this isn't about fixing yourself necessarily, but it's about designing environments that really work better with how the brain functions. And if there is one takeaway on my side, is that sustainable design choices and not just willpower or discipline are what really support energy, focus, and fulfillment over time. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on People in Science Live in February. Thanks again today. Bye, everybody.